Good morning. We're joined here today on the territory of the signatories of Treaty 7, and I acknowledge the Métis people who share a deep connection to this land. I'm joined here this morning by my colleague Kathleen Ganley, our critic for energy. My name is Shannon Phillips. I'm the MLA for Lethbridge West and the finance critic for the NDP opposition. First, I want to talk a little bit about the tough news on jobs today. For the second month in a row, Alberta has lost full-time jobs. That's 13,500 full-time jobs lost over the past 2 months. Now, a lot of Albertans will be asking, why, when energy prices are so high, did I lose my job? These kinds of job losses signal that we're not seeing the kind of broad-based recovery that working families need here in Alberta. And in Calgary, it's even worse. We're still looking at the highest unemployment of any major Canadian city. It is clear that Albertans can't trust the UCP to manage the economy when we have $100 a barrel oil, and so many Calgarians cannot find full-time work. Meanwhile, everywhere we look, life is getting more expensive for Alberta families. Groceries cost more every time you go to the store. Gasoline costs more every time we fill up, if you can afford to fill up. And on top of all this, the UCP is hitting Alberta families with $1 billion tax grab. Just going to say that again. The UCP have imposed $1 billion in new personal income tax on Alberta families. Talking about this makes the UCP very, very uncomfortable. The finance minister periodically tries to deny it, but it is all there in black and white in his no-help budget, and he confirmed it this week in the legislature. Starting in the 2019 budget, the UCP stopped raising tax brackets with inflation, meaning that every year a bigger share of your paycheck is exposed to taxation. It's called bracket creep, and we learned this week that this sneaky UCP income tax will cost Alberta families an extra $1 billion over the life of this government's fiscal plan. That's $1 billion in new personal income tax pulled out of the pockets of working Alberta families while profitable corporations pay fewer taxes than ever before. Just how dishonest, sneaky, and underhanded is this $1 billion tax grab? Well, I'd like to call in an expert witness. He's a former president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the Member of Parliament for Calgary Southeast and then Calgary Midnapore. His name is Jason Kenney.
This is how bracket creep works. When one takes into account the effect of the de-indexation of the tax brackets, this sneaky, backdoor, malicious tax increase. It's a government that's put 900,000 low-income people on the tax rolls through its backdoor tax increase called bracket creep. I have to assume the Prime Minister doesn't do his own taxes, because if he did, and he filed them last week, he would see that his taxes, like those of most Canadians, have gone up because of the bracket creep of this government. Single mothers and single parents struggling to get by, or seniors on fixed incomes, have seen themselves pushed onto the tax rolls by this government's pernicious backdoor tax grab called bracket creep, and the pernicious tax on inflation. Single moms, minimum wages, and low-income, fixed-income seniors who are paying taxes today but weren't 6 years ago because of this government's heartless and insidious bracket creep tax on the poor, Mr. Speaker, that forces low-income people into the tax bracket. How can this minister claim that this is a tax relief budget when revenues are going up, when taxes are going up, when bracket creep is taken into account in the CPP, people will pay more, not less after this budget, Mr. Speaker. Again, what they forget to tell us, Mr. Speaker, is that they have not indexed the tax system to inflation. They have not eliminated this pernicious tax grab called bracket creep. They continues to work its nasty work through increasing taxes on Canadians. So since the finance minister won't commit to broad-based tax relief, will the Prime Minister commit to stop raising taxes through the hidden tax grab called bracket creep? So when is this finance minister or Prime Minister going to stop this destructive tax on inflation, or are they going to continue to be known by Canadians as the bracket creeps? There we go.
So watching those videos really drives home that Jason Kenney knows exactly what he is doing today. He knows exactly that it is dishonest and wrong, but he is doing it anyway. Now, on top of this billion-dollar tax grab, the UCP is forcing Albertans to pay more property tax, school fees, tuition, student interest debt, camping fees, car insurance, and more for utilities. It is a stark reminder that Albertans cannot trust the UCP. I'll just pass things over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Shannon. Just as you said, one of the major new costs that the UCP is hammering families with is utilities. Albertans are opening bills that are hundreds of dollars bigger than they were a few months ago or last year. The UCP promised to bring in a natural gas rebate program, but it turned out to be a complete fake. Not one single Albertan will see a dime in rebates from this program this winter, and it's highly unlikely that anyone will get help from this program ever. How did the UCP think this would work? The truth is they didn't. They committed a total of $0 in the budget to paying for the natural gas rebates. Albertans can't trust this UCP government. Turning to electricity, the UCP's finance minister recently told people in Grand Prairie that he couldn't even afford his own electricity bill, despite taking home more than $250,000 in salary, benefits, and expenses. But all that he came up with in a week was a $50 electricity rebate. $50. Albertans have reached out to me with monthly bills of $700 or more. A woman in Grand Prairie confronted Taves with a bill of $1,900. But all she got in response was a fake natural gas rebate and an insulting $50 electricity rebate. We need meaningful action on cutting costs for families, and they can start by scrapping their billion-dollar tax grab. Thank you, and we're happy to take your questions.
Okay, we'll go to the lines first. Just a reminder to press, use the raise hand function if you're joining by Zoom, and star 9 if you're joining by phone. First question goes to Safe Kaiser.
Good morning. My question for either the finance or energy critic here. Now, I asked the energy minister earlier today what else is being done to try and help people as oil prices and fuel skyrocket, and I was told by Sonia Savage that they're going to continue looking at the issue and discussing it. And when I asked the question again, I got about a minute response attacking the carbon tax. So I'm wondering what you think needs to be done here, as you know, as you state yourself, that some people are struggling to even fill up and get to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a number of things this government can do. First off, they could bring in a real natural gas rebate that applies at prices that we have now, as opposed to price only applying if we get worse. Another thing they could do is they can consider a more meaningful rebate or a cap on electricity prices. It's all very well for them to say that they're thinking about it and they're talking about it and they'd like to do something about it one day, but that just fails to take into account the lived reality of Albertans who are struggling right now, who are making tough choices, like the choice between groceries and electricity.
Follow-up, Safe?
Absolutely. Looking at fuel specifically, gasoline and diesel, leaving utilities out of it, is there anything within the government's power that can actually be done to I guess, bring some relief?
Yeah, I think there are probably several things they could do. They could look at rebates. They could look at a number of other things. Certainly, we did call on them to look at cutting the provincial portion of the tax, and they have done that, although it doesn't take effect immediately. But I think that there are a number of things they can do on that front. And I think as well that it's worth noting that it's not just one cost that's slamming Alberta families. It's a bunch of costs together. The UCP, for instance, repealed the cap on insurance rates, and we've seen insurance rates skyrocket. This without requiring those companies to come forward and prove that they needed those increases, as we had asked them to do when we were in government. They're increasing tuition, they're increasing the cost of paying back your student loans. So I think there's a lot of things they could do.
Okay, we'll go to our next caller. Caller, your line should be open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It's Lisa Johnson at the Edmonton Journal. I'm wondering if Kathleen or Shannon, if you'd like to comment on the disjunct between, I guess this question is for Shannon, the disjunct between Alberta's projected GDP growth, which is looking to be the highest in the country this year, versus these job gains numbers that we're seeing today.
Well, I think one of the first things is that we don't have we still have not returned to a stable business environment, largely due to absolute mismanagement and chaos with respect to diversification programs and even pandemic management and healthcare system management. And that makes it tremendously difficult for firms to continue to hire, to do business planning and so on. And these jobs numbers are going to reflect even some of that instability from the Omicron wave. I think the other thing that we need to keep in mind here is that what we are seeing is a dramatic spike in oil prices, but we are not seeing the broad-based economic benefits because we don't have a good, stable business environment. We don't have the signals to the private sector around diversification initiatives and investment. But the other thing we don't have is I think a focus on how job or economic gains are not translating to the kitchen table. And they are being eaten up by the cost of living. So even if salaries are going up, even if there is a little bit of hiring in a few different sectors, we are seeing that being eaten up for people and for firms in the cost of doing business or the cost of living. Insurance, fuel costs, electricity, natural gas, and for people who are looking for training, we're looking at student loan costs. We are looking at, again, car insurance costs. And then overall, we are seeing more and more of people's disposable income being taxed in the provincial income tax system, as we have discovered this week, $1 billion worth of new provincial income taxes being borne by us all. So this is even people who are captured just under the basic personal exemption. More of their income will be taxed than it would have been previously prior to this program. So overall, we see a basket of things that are holding back job creation, that are holding back economic growth, and in particular, holding back stability for ordinary people, because so much more of their disposable income is being eaten up by these costs that many of which are not the fault of the provincial government, for example, groceries. But on the other side, the provincial government has, at every available opportunity, saddled people with more costs. There is not one cost that I can see from the provincial government side, any decision that they could make that would alleviate those costs, that they have taken up on, with the exception now of the fuel tax, where we have absolutely no visibility on whether that will translate into actual savings for ordinary people.
Follow, Lisa?
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're saying essentially higher costs for businesses are hindering hiring?
Well, higher costs for businesses are going to hinder a whole bunch of things, right? And that we are seeing that, and the government knows this. This is littered throughout their fiscal plan: the inflationary pressures for business and the inflationary pressures for ordinary people. They did not take the opportunity to address those pressures that they identify in their own fiscal plan, not once. They, in fact, at every available opportunity, whether it's insurance or natural gas or electricity or costs for training, they took the opportunity to raise those costs for individuals and for business. And so it is small wonder then that is creating a bit of a drag. We are also seeing a drag on the economy, I would argue, because we are not as open as we could be to diversification initiatives and new investment, and we are not quite through the knock-on effects of just dreadful pandemic mismanagement that made it very, very difficult difficult for business to plan to open and to stay open over the last 2 years.
Okay, we'll go to our next caller, Tom Vernon from Global News.
Hi, Shannon. The job numbers this year, thanks for taking my question. The job numbers this month showed that there was a surge in part-time, but obviously there was a big pullback in full-time. Is there anything government can do policy-wise, economic environment-wise to encourage more full-time positions, or is this purely market forces here?
Well, I mean, some of this is simply the holdover from an extraordinary amount of uncertainty due to pandemic chaos and mismanagement from the Kenney government, and we also are seeing here potentially firms a little bit reticent in a high cost environment to make some of those longer term business planning investments if they don't know how high their insurance, utility, natural gas, or other input costs are going to go. And so, month over month, we do see some volatility in jobs numbers. But what we're seeing over the longer term is we are still seeing Calgary with the highest unemployment of any Canadian major city. That's not a month over month thing. That is now a persistent feature of the Canadian unemployment rate and Alberta's. We have seen absolutely no action on that front. And in fact, what we saw was an initiative that was broadly described as an insult to the people of Calgary in the last provincial budget. We are now seeing over and over again young people who are reevaluating their choices as to either go into post-secondary education in this province or stay when they are done, given the dramatic rise in costs, both in tuition and their cost of servicing their student loan debt, and that is baked into this budget as well. So we see a number of areas that are going to exercise a drag on the jobs market that is a holdover over many months and many business quarters that is not simply a blip of a month over month statistic.
I wanted to get you actually on the tuition. We just saw, the University of Alberta we heard earlier this week now in Calgary, we're seeing these huge hikes in some areas as well. What's the long-term danger, risk of having these huge tuition hikes?
It's not a risk, it's a gamble with our future, and that's exactly what the UCP has chosen to do. Some of these programs are going up by more than 100%. There was a mental health counseling program that was going up by 109%. These are the kinds of people that we need to undertake training and expertise here in Alberta and stay here to help us build this province. And these are the exact people that we are now driving out of this province. The government has undertaken more than $600 million worth of cuts to the post-secondary system, and then they have turned around and also piled on additional costs. They've raised interest rates for student loan debt. Finance Minister said this week that it was a modest amount of money for him and for provincial coffers. So in other words, they're just doing it for kicks. They're doing this for no particular reason and turning around and saddling people with hundreds of dollars more per year in debt servicing costs. There is no need for this. This is simply a choice on behalf of the UCP government, and it is a choice that makes it such that young people are not choosing to stay to get their post-secondary education here, and even if they do, they may not stay to pursue opportunities here. It is a terrible gamble with the province's future.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for questions either on the line or in person. And seeing none, that's all for today.
Thank you.
Tens of thousands of Albertans have already provided their idea for how we can build Alberta's future. You can too by going to albertasfuture.ca.